Man quits his job to become an F-rank adventurer and an unstoppable force. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. Around a gloomy castle, a man is violently thrown to the ground, and already exhausted, he breathlessly states that this is his end. Surrounding him, a group of hidden beings remarks that the man has become extremely strong, but the guy insists it's not enough. They say we should pursue our dreams while we are still young, especially for adventurers, since the tool of their trade is their own body. However, there are adults who simply cannot let go of what they desire. At the local adventurers guild, it's the day for the selection of candidates who wish to be promoted to rank E. One of them, named Rick, shows up for the test, and the receptionist Alyssa gets excited upon recognizing her old friend. They worked together in an office, but the guy left shortly after. But the most surprising thing was that he registered with the guild. Rick comments that it's indeed uncommon to start being an adventurer at 30 years old, because most people begin as apprentices at rank F when they are still teenagers. By the way, Alyssa asks what he's been doing all this time, and he says he spent these years training in the mountains with some more experienced companions. Suddenly, a drunk interrupts the conversation and asks if the pretty girl there is free to hang out, to which she awkwardly replies that she's working. The drunk continues to insist, to the point of grabbing her wrist and saying that women should obey men. To resolve the situation, Rick wraps his arm around the guy's shoulder and gives a light slap to his stomach. The man trembles due to the excess alcohol and faints. Finding it amusing, Alyssa hands the guy the card for the rank E test. Upon reading the registration number 79, he starts the day already feeling nervous. Outside, a woman named Rionette asks Rick if he has already registered, and he says after raising his eyes a bit more that he's set to take the test alongside those radiant and voluminous youngsters. Rionette asks if that's a reason to look at her front, but the guy pretends she's imagining things. Inside, the guild adventurers notice the handprint on the drunk's steel armor, while authorities approach and recognize Gommel the Wild Knight, a former rank A adventurer wanted for assault. Alyssa reflects on how Rick handled the guy and wonders if it was he who caused it. Later, during the medical exam for the selection, the evaluators measure the height of candidate number 79 and are surprised to note that the man is already 32 years old, leaving Rick embarrassed as always. Next, it's time for the measurement of magical energy by touching the sphere. When the third candidate discovers it is C+, everyone around is impressed until Rick is called. After some anticipation, the sphere makes a pathetic crackling sound and evaluates the adventurer as F, causing the surrounding candidates to laugh, having never seen someone with such low magical energy. Curiously, after Rick's departure, the sphere cracks. Then begins the brute strength test, where the candidates must direct all their strength in a single blow. The slime sack absorbs any type of attack, so people don't need to hold back. Upon hearing this, Rick remembers the mountain training where his tutor taught that no matter the magic or weapon you are using, the body will always be the foundation of everything. Therefore, if a man can destroy this golden slime sack with his bare hands, he will know he has built a body he can trust. Rick argues that he is not capable of destroying something so resistant, but the instructor explains that this is just the basics, then easily destroys the sack and claims to be able to do it with 200 of these at once. With that said, Rick began his training on the golden slime with 50,000 punches a day, feeling the hell of that time on his skin. Soon the test begins, and the first candidate impresses by using strengthening magic in a kick. The second was a smug and vain duke's son, said to be only 11 years old, with magic equivalent to rank C, a typical child prodigy. So the boy goes on to conjure a magic by reciting an entire poem. With great energy emanating around his body, he casts the third nature composite magic flame elimination. Thus, a ridiculous fireball zigzags towards the sack and dissipates into it. The evaluator is impressed with the young man's genius, while Rick remembers that he also had lessons in third nature composite heat magic. At the time, the instructor threw a fireball capable of ruining an entire mountain. After other candidates have their turn, candidate number 79 is called for the test. Before starting, one of the evaluators notes that Rick cannot expect much growth in his magic at this age because the correct thing is to start practicing from a young age. The evaluators conclusion is that Rick should give up. Feeling the pressure of the surrounding gazes, he knows he should do exactly that, but still his internal flame burns brighter than ever. One day, while training punches on the slime sack despite his fists bleeding absurdly, he still had 30,000 punches to meet the day's goal, so the teacher recommended that he stop, but he continued until the end. In the end, he knows well that he started much later than the others, but his belief that he can make up for lost time is greater than anything. With this sentiment, he delivers a punch that devastates the slime sack. The brat duke's son grumbles that the guy is stealing the attention that should be his, but he assures he will get back at him in the defensive magic test, which is his specialty. Later in the defensive magic test, Rick manages to defend against a fourth nature composite magic that the kid couldn't, and by this point, everyone was gaping at candidate number 79. With that done, the evaluator announces that he will raise the level and use the fifth nature composite. However, the guy explains that he can only go up to the first nature composite, so the instructor believes he is being underestimated and intends not to hold back in this next attack. Soon he conjures a shock cyclone, a level 5 spell, leaving the other adventurers in disbelief at the outcome. Sylvester Elsernia, a first-class knight of the kingdom, hears the explosion from afar and goes to investigate, as such a large blast shouldn't be part of a test. Upon learning what happened, Lord Sylvester thinks someone is playing a joke on him because no F-rank individual should be capable of what was reported. He then reads the profile of candidate 79 Rick Gladiator, aged 32, and is astonished at the man's age. According to the records, Rick worked for 14 years as a receptionist at the Tiger Road Sinquat Guild branch. After the defensive magic test, the protagonist completed the written exam and finished the tests for the day. Later, talking with Rionette, he confesses that he doesn't know if he did well on the first day, especially since he scored an F in magical capacity. As a consolation, Rionette notes that the young man has improved a lot over the past 2 years. Suddenly, a haughty duke's son appears, calling Rick a commoner. Rick tries to remember the boy's name but fails. Furious, the kid says his name is Fried Diamuit, so Rick asks if he needs help finding his parents. Even more upset, Fried cries, saying today was supposed to be his day to shine, but the old man stole his spotlight in the test. Right behind the boy, Angelica, his older sister, scolds Rick for making her little brother cry. In tears, Fried claims the 40-year-old man mistreated him, so Rick tries in vain to convince them that he's in his early 30s. Ignoring everything, Angelica challenges the man to a duel, throwing a glove at his chest. He picks it up and says that while a noble's daughter might not know doing laundry is hard work. As he picks the glove off the ground, Rionette informs him that this gesture symbolizes accepting the duel, leaving the poor guy with no way out. Without delay, Angelica Diamuit, a second-class knight of the kingdom's knights, drags the opponent to the arena to punish the supposedly 40-year-old rascal, as she puts it. Following Philheim tradition, Angelica proposes that the loser must serve the winner until death. Amidst this, Rick asks what the level of the challenger might be, and Rionette believes that a second-class knight of the kingdom is probably rank B, so she asks the young man to go easy on her. Confused, Rick reminds her that he's the rank F in this story. To reassure him, the woman asks him to remember what he trained for in the past years, but the memories make him even more anxious. As a last resort, Rionette reminds the man that he's part of the Orichalcum Fist, the group that prides itself on being the strongest on the continent. With that said, Rick Gladiator stands up again and heads towards the challenger. Full of herself, Angelica claims she'll go easy on the rookie, drawing her sword and casting a spell. Rick analyzed that she's the type of swordsman who strengthens the body and weapons, but she doesn't give him time to delve deeper into his study, using her instant step ability to pass by him with impressive speed, making him hear the blade close to his ear. She claims to have given a warning strike, but even reducing her speed, the rank F couldn't dodge. Laughing at the old man, Fried reveals that his sister is so fast she's known throughout the kingdom as Angelica the Flash. Then she warns that this time she won't miss on purpose and attacks again with instant step. Ironically, as the attacker approached, Rick noticed that she's extremely slow, easily dodging her without any effort. Jaw-dropping, Angelica thought that only a few first-class knights could react in time to this kind of attack, but believes it was pure luck, so she charges at the opponent again. Once more, Rick can't understand how this woman can be so slow with a nickname like that, considering she must be just a rich daddy's girl who became a knight because of her wealthy father. Suddenly, she trips over a stone on the way, spinning through the air until she plants her sword into the wall with force. Not having anticipated her attack, Rick thinks that ability is incredible, putting his tail between his legs again, not knowing she merely tripped and lost her momentum. Angelica doesn't want to lose her composure either, so she pretends she spun on purpose. Next, she announces she'll use an ultimate level instant step, a move that impacts her body so much she can only use it 3 times. Rick acknowledges that she's much faster now, yet still seems like a turtle with a cramp. Despite the failure of this attack, Angelica insists on the same tactic and repeats the move, leaving only one more chance with this ability. Persistently, she maintains the strategy until she trips over another stone along the way. Afraid he won't be able to react in time to this change, of course, Rick strikes the ground, isolating the opponent and creating a crater in the soil. Unable to believe what's happening, Angelica asks who this guy is, and he responds that he quit his job a few years ago to try becoming an adventurer, but he will give his all to pursue this career. With that, to the rookie's surprise, the knight surrenders, using the excuse that she'll let this one slide because he managed to avoid her attacks. Not being a fool, Rick Gladiator asks about the agreement that the loser would become the servant, and Angelica uses the greatest speed ever recorded by her to flee the scene. After the victory, Rionette informs Rick that Brufston and the others are coming to the kingdom at this moment to see how he's doing, and Rick has only bad premonitions about it. In the next scene, the legend of the warrior who faced the supreme monster Kaiser Alcipiat to conquer a treasure capable of granting any wish called the Akashic Records is told. However, this warrior never managed to defeat that mythical creature, and only some child who dreams of being an adventurer will someday obtain this treasure. This is what the legendary warrior believes. Back in the current kingdom of Philheim, the results of the preliminary tests for rank E are about to be announced, and if the magical energy transmitted to each exam card is blue, then that candidate has passed. Tomorrow, all the approved candidates will participate in a simulated battle in the second stage of the exam. Next to Rionette, Rick Gladiator is tense as another failure could mean his definitive withdrawal, given that he is already past the usual age for this. Soon his card begins to glow and fluctuates from blue to red before finally confirming his approval. Upon leaving the room, Rick smells something awful until a young charmer throws his charm at the beautiful maiden in the room, according to his words. He emphasizes that the noble house of Diamuit governs the people from north to south, and he is the eldest son, Raster Diamuit. The nobleman asks the maiden's name, and she responds that she is Rionette Urfelt. Rick also introduces himself, but the nobleman makes it clear that he doesn't care about a middle-aged, lackluster fool. Raster then turns his attention back to the elf and says he lost his heart in the depths of her eyes, so he would like to take her to the northern lands to make her his second wife. As the young man was rubbing the elf's hand, Rick decided to interfere to prevent things from going south for him, so he says that he is the lady's boyfriend and cannot allow such flirtation in front of him. Not believing him, Raster despises Rick's rank F card, to which the protagonist retorts that the nobleman is also no longer a kid to be taking the rank E exam. However, this was the perfect cue for the heir to boast that he passed this level at only 14 years old. In fact, he belongs to rank M and is the examiner of the simulated battle. Full of himself, he shows his credentials and advises Rionette to leave this loser and dine with a real adventurer. The elf laments disappointing the nobleman, but as can be seen, she is in the company of this gentleman. Additionally, she comments that the smell of Raster's cologne is so strong that it causes discomfort. Outraged, the heir of House Diamuit calls Rick a fifth-rate trash and tells him to prepare for the simulated battle, as there he will show the difference between them and knock some sense into the elf's head. After Raster leaves, Rick takes the opportunity to apologize to Rionette for saying she is his girlfriend, but she confesses that the story made her happy, and besides, it resolved the problem. Back at his palace, the heir drowns his sorrows in drink while cursing that guy's life. Suddenly, his brothers come to him in tears, complaining that a 30-year-old commoner made fun of them during the first test. According to the eldest, no one is allowed to make 2 members of House Diamuit cry, so he promises to make the criminal pay. Given that they said the man was older, Rick comes to Raster's mind, who asks his brothers if they remember the man's registration number. Freed only only recalls that the number seemed to say the guy was going to die, so the heir laughs upon discovering who it is. A few days later, the time for the simulated battle had arrived, and Rionette asks Rick to go easy on people. He replies that he isn't even capable of going hard, unlike that northern playboy who will end him in this test. Certain that he would be beaten, the young man begins to cry until a man in front of him introduces himself as Lynx Lorot and states that he will be Gladiator's examiner in the battle, as he will be responsible for numbers 50 to 100. With that said, Rick celebrates upon realizing that his registration number 79 wasn't as unlucky as he thought. As if that weren't enough, Lynx praises the candidate, saying that the fact he is 30 years old and quit his job to become an adventurer has restored hope for the man who one day wants to be like Rick. Lynx started as an adventurer at 24 and only got his career going after 30. Therefore, he sees Rick Gladiator as an example of determination. Now 40 years old, the examiner intends to fulfill his dream of reaching rank, although it took him almost 20 years to reach B. With that, Rick enthusiastically greets the man, and although Lynx emphasizes that he will not have a favorite candidate in the exam, he invites Gladiator for a drink after the test. Listening to every word from his hiding spot, Raster waits for the examiner to pass by to approach him. After this conversation, Rick seems much more relaxed for the battle, as a huge weight has been lifted off his shoulders. However, one of the organizers enters the concentration room and informs that Lynx Lorot, the examiner for candidates 50 to 100, has suddenly fallen ill. Given the situation, Raster Diamuit will take over these candidates. Rionette had already suspected there would be some problem, considering that Rick ended up crossing paths with the 3 Diamuit sons. Around him, an adventurer laments Raster being the examiner because he is known as the man of 1,000 skills, a genius who rose to ranka at just 17 years old. As if that weren't enough, he has another nickname that's even worse, the Rankaf Crusher, and they say he harasses candidates every year for pure entertainment. Meanwhile, preparing for the simulated battle, Raster begins to show his claws by defeating a candidate with just one spell. According to him, this is the problem with people of humble origins, they aren't even good for a warm-up. Behind him, an elite guard receives the signal. Desperate Rick Gladiator asks what to do now, despite Rionette not understanding the reason for all the drama. The man remembers that the examiner is a rank A who hates him, not to mention all the people who always said he would fail. So Rionette responds that since other people's words can give or take away the confidence of those who hear them, she says that Rick is a strong man capable of passing the test and defeating the playboy with the spoiled perfume. Ever since Rick decided to become an adventurer, all he's done is succeed. Hearing these words, he feels more motivated to continue his journey without much regret. That is until a hooded kid approaches him and asks to read his fortune for free, saying he saw in Rick a man fighting his own demons who needs some clairvoyance. With nothing better to do, the protagonist accepts the challenge and sits in the chair. As he does, he falls into a magical trap and vanishes. The kid then removes his hood, revealing himself to be freed Diamuit. Rionette, furious, cuts the kid's crystal ball in half, blows up the wall behind him in the process, and grabs Freed by the collar to find out where the adventurer has been sent. When he refuses to cooperate, she cuts half of his eyelashes and warns that next time it will be his eyes. Freed panics and admits it's a teleportation spell that reaches 90 yards, meaning the old man isn't far. Rick ends up behind the test area, where he's greeted by an elite guard and his cronies. Realizing this, the rank F adventurer discovers he is indeed being sabotaged by the Diamuit family. The strength of the men surrounding him is equivalent to rank B, meaning he's about to take a big beating and miss the exam. To make matters worse, the leader of the elite guards can take on rank A warriors. Rick's fate seems sealed, but the Orichalcum Fist appears on the hill before the worst happens. The boss reminds Rick he has a test and asks what the hell he's doing there. The henchmen can't believe they're facing a talking orc. Rick stammers before making up that these men around him are helping him warm up for the simulated battle, so the orc offers to help too. In despair, Rick tells the elite guards to run for their lives, but they don't feel threatened. One of them strikes the orc's head with a hammer, which crumbles without causing any damage. Not satisfied, the man attacks the orc's arm, so the orc breaks his wrist. To everyone's surprise, the monster heals his attacker's hand and explains that there's a lack of balance in weight compensation for a stronger punch, as the body is a completely connected mass that can't be ignored. Hearing these words, the elite guard's leader realizes who these people are. Meanwhile, the Orichalcum Fist boy pulls out his his super cannon called Revised Juliet loaded with magic stones and lead bullets and announces he'll resolve the conflict peacefully. Then he attacks 3 enemies in front of him, leaving Rick stunned. Lastly, the guards take the orichalcum girl hostage and order everyone to surrender or they'll slit her throat. Rick and the orc warn the man to let her go before something worse happens, and the girl asks her friends what the guy behind her is doing. Rick explains to Alysaret that the man is just trying to play, so she asks what kind of game it is. The guard, losing patience, punches her to keep her quiet, which awakens the child's fury, destroying everything around her with 7th nature composite magic. The guard's leader bows his head and explains that this girl is only 10 years old but is the most powerful vampire mage. After all, she's the demon child of devastation, Alysaret Drakwell. As for the other member, who looks like a boy, his appearance is deceiving. He's a half-elf, half-dwarf, over 50 years old, with techniques a millennium ahead of his time, being the greatest weaponsmith in the world. His name is Mizet Eldwarf, known as the Millennial Workshop. Lastly, the orc possesses unparalleled physical strength, and his intelligence is equally impressive. Able to use all existing support spells, this is Brufston a Shork, the Wise Beast. According to the guard leader, the 3 are rank S adventurers and make up the continent's most legendary group, the legendary Orichalcum Fist. For the first time in his life, the old man saw these 3 with his own eyes, so he drops his weapons and declares he will retire to live the rest of his life in peace. With that said, Alysaret annihilates the remaining guards, while Rick celebrates his chance to take the test. Back with Rionette, the adventurer surprises Freed, who thought the old man was as good as dead, and the elf gets rid of him ruthlessly. Then Lynx appears injured and reports that Raster did this to him. As if that weren't enough, before giving the examiner a beating, the heir asked what his dream was. Coming from humble beginnings, Lynx came from a place where kids want to be adventurers but have no opportunities, so his dream is to open a school for them. Hearing this, Raster locked Lynx up and scorned his attempt to educate society's scum, saying a third-rate teacher will produce students just as rotten. Lynx was furious at this insult, but couldn't respond to the noble. Thinking about this, the examiner asks Rick to give up the exam, not knowing what he's getting into, but Rick has no intention of giving up. Returning to the arena, Raster sees one of his guards fall unconscious, so he deduces that Rick Gladiator is on his way. The noble would love to crush that man's dreams without even allowing him to try, but since he'll have the displeasure of a direct clash, he wonders if he can make rank F suffer in another way, like making hell seem like a playground for that guy. While waiting for that moment to arrive, the noble entertains himself by setting fire to the poor souls during the preparation for the grand event. Amidst all this, Adolf observed the training, not expecting much from a rank A. By breaking the 4th wall, he directly teaches us that the 4 great fundamentals of every adventurer are physical strength, body control, mana quantity, and magical control. Together, these stats dictate the power of the person who possesses them. Arnold has the innate ability to visualize the scores of these fundamentals in other people. To prove his point, he compares the status difference between one of the event participants and Raster, who has such an overwhelming amount of mana that it even hurts the young man's eyes. Looking around with his impaired vision, he sees Rick and can't understand what an old man is doing in a test for kids. However, upon analyzing the stats of the man, Arnold's eyes burn more than ever. Upon arriving at the arena, Rionette is approached by the Adventurers Guild receptionist Alice Granger, who tries to strike up a conversation with the elf for some reason. In a corner of the bleachers, Alysaret calls her friend to watch the event near the Orichalcum Fist. Alice is dumbfounded to see an orc in the arena, while Rionette refuses Mizet's proposal to sit near him to avoid being a victim of the elf dwarf's hand. Since it didn't work out with his friend, he tries his luck with Rick Gladiator's former co-worker, as she has a pleasant and swaying heart. The elf warns that the guy is not to be trusted, then pushes the human to another corner. Brufston asks how the promising rookie of their group is doing, and Rionette informs that Rick will pass this test without major problems. Alice warns that the examiner for this test is a rank A who always overdoes it when dealing with rookies, but even so, the orc doesn't think it's a problem. On the other side of the arena, Angelica eggs her brother on to beat up that idiot who looks 40 until she sees her youngest getting beaten up and arriving beside her. Facing Rick Gladiator, Raster confesses confesses that he was surprised to see the rookie escape his guards, but he didn't expect much from insignificant plebeians like them. Now the old man will face the creme de la creme of the kingdom of Philheim, the self-proclaimed genius Raster Diarmuid. After feeling something strange in his body, Rick questions why the noble became an adventurer, and he responds that he has the talent for it, and that it further boosts his status even though he is an heir. Indignant at the opponent's lack of honor, Rick asserts that he won't allow himself to be defeated by a guy like this. Raster warns that talk is cheap and proves his point by invoking a first nature composite magic, the ice shot. Throwing the icy spear near the protagonist's face, Raster thinks the guy froze in fear and couldn't dodge, but in reality Rick was just staying calm in the face of the challenge, just as Rionette asked him to do before entering the fight. Being honest with himself, he is worried, but is striving to follow the elf's directive. On the other hand, since Rick didn't react, the noble claims he will do as he pleases. Around him, his siblings shout for the eldest to finish off the guy, so Raster invokes a third nature composite magic, the illuminated flame, leaving Rick surprised that the opponent didn't use an incantation for a spell of that level. Despite the roar of the flames, Gladiator remains static in the face of the fire magic. Brufston comments that it was so insignificant that it can't even be classified as an attack against his pupil. Seeing Alice worried, he asks if she knows what the four fundamentals are, and she accurately names them all. Brufston explains that among them, the mana quantity should be developed when young, roughly until the age of 20. Since Rick started this life at 30, the only thing he can rely on is his own body. For this reason, the orc applied specific training to the student aiming at this characteristic, placing weights for him to walk and get physically stronger to compensate for the lack of mana. Meanwhile, Raster conjures the cutting hurricane of fourth nature composite magic and throws it at the examinee. Brufston explains that he taught Rick to develop this body from scratch, while Mizet was responsible for teaching magical control. Elisarette says she just played magic games with Rick sometimes. Lastly, Rionette trained the pupil's body control. By dedicating himself so much to the activities he practiced with the Orichalcum Fist, Gladiator reached the level of an S rank, just like the other members of this organization. At that moment, Raster launches his shock burn, still using fourth nature. Rionette observes that Rick himself doesn't realize the level he has reached, because Brufston made sure to keep the student's feet on the ground like the day the boy couldn't break a rock in half. The orc said even a rank F could do it. In the midst of this, Raster continued applying his sorcery to the candidate with ferocity, despising the third-rate scum that dares to challenge nobility. With all his hatred for the rabble, the rich guy unleashes so many spells that the dust from the explosions fills the arena. Ironically, he admits he went a bit overboard. Regardless, none of this had any effect on Rick, who reappears without significant damage, further irritating the examiner. Consequently, Raster raises the level of the challenge by using physical fortification that boosts his strength and speed. Once again, Rick repels the adversary as if he were an insect, then reflects that he understood Rionette's point about self-control and perseverance. Focusing only on his innate talent, Raster neglected his own development, making him extremely careless despite the enormous amount of mana. With this realization in mind, the rookie declares he will not lose this fight. Even though the situation is not as favorable as imagined, Raster continues to believe that the candidate got away just by luck, so he begins to cast his first enchantment spell, cheering on his siblings in the stands. Using a third composite nature spell, Flame Elimination, Raster hurls a vast layer of flames at his opponent, who easily blocks the attack. This time, Raster can't hide his look of surprise. Mizet explains that Rick used his magic with a high degree of precision to block, because having low mana doesn't mean you can't compensate with excellent self-control. Despite his arrogance, Raster accuses the opponent of being cocky, claiming that all his blocks were pure coincidence. Still confident in his superiority, Raster is forced to use his iron body to take the student's blow, fearing an early demise. Indignant, Angelica comments that her brother is losing to a guy who hasn't even used any physical enhancement. At the same time, Raster finally admits that this guy is stronger than a rank E, but insists that Rick only dodged the attacks by pure luck. Tired of the noble's arrogance, Rick emphasizes the effort it takes for someone not to recognize the opponent's strength, especially since he didn't use any magic in the fight, only his body control. Still skeptical, Raster asks how this guy got so strong in just 2 years considering he's old. Hearing this question from a spoiled rich kid who always had all the opportunities life could offer, Rick feels personally offended. He had endured training where he was trapped inside a dragon's lair until the creature was dead and swam in monster capture fluid until he drowned. Alice asks what this story is about, and Brufston confirms that the guy not only drowned but also died a few other times. However, the orc's healing ability is powerful enough to bring someone back to life if they've just died. This is one reason why Rick is so powerful. After all, he could come back from the dead to continue his body reconstruction training, a regimen not just anyone could undertake. Whether thrown into a precipice or hit by a city-sized rock, Rick could come back to life and continue his training. Raster claims this is all lies because even if such a harsh realm existed, Rick would never have the motivation to go through with it. On the other hand, the novice adventurer asserts that he is just like Lynx, the examiner Raster injured. Despite their age, both still dream big. Disregarding the usual talk about having dreams, the noble questions what the goal is, to which Rick firmly states that he will defeat the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Alcipiat. Freed laughs at this, and his older brother follows suit. Alice remembers that this monster appears in the legend of hero Yamato, and Brufston adds that Kaiser is the final goal of the Orichalcum Fist. Raster says this is a childish dream, a fairy tale that never existed, but Rick no longer has patience for the noble's arrogance and ignores him. Faced with this, Raster promises to end the fight once and for all. He invokes a 7th composite nature spell called Forest Rope, which restrains Rick's movement. Then he recites his most powerful ability of the 8th nature. As a result, a gigantic wooden golem is created, terrifying the event's spectators. Inside the monster's mouth, Raster mocks the adversary's reaction, who was summoning an air shot. However, as he emphasizes, Rick points out that his opponent may have trained the technique he's using dozens of times, but he trained this simpler technique 100 million times. Everyone around thinks this is a lie, but Brufston explains that it's possible with the use of space-time magic. Anyway, Raster still doesn't believe all this talk and completes the conjuration of his most powerful spell, the Divine Impact Yggdrasil. On the other side, Rick uses the simple air shot of the 1st composite nature to confront the golem. Fist to fist, they measure strength, but it's the giant golem that suffers the most, its structure gradually breaking apart until it explodes from the immense pressure from the opposite side. With that done, Raster falls defeated to the ground, and Rick proudly declares that his dream remains intact. After the victory, the Orichalcum Fist praises the pupil's performance, who finally understands that he has indeed become extremely powerful, something he didn't know until then. On the defeated side, Raster is consoled by his siblings until he appears before the Orichalcum Fist. Rick takes the opportunity to mock him, saying that an elite genius was crushed by a lowly commoner. Freed threatens to grumble, but Angelica tells him to stay put. Then Rick adds that he chose a few techniques to practice exhaustively instead of hundreds of useless powers, advising the noble to train a limited number of spells. Unconvinced, Raster warns the student that he will be his examiner in the next promotion test, and when that happens, he will crush the candidate. Finally, he continues to refer to Rick as third-rate and tells him to prepare for what's to come. Freed and Angelica run after their injured brother, but the girl pauses for a moment to greet Rick, something he never imagined possible. Later, the exam results were about to be announced, and the responsible person calls out the numbers of the promoted candidates one by one. Calmly, Rick waits for the numbers to be selected alongside Rionette and other examinees who, unlike the protagonist, were anxious. Meanwhile, Alice eats a meal with the other members of the Orichalcum Fist and asks if it's okay for them to be there before the announcement of those who passed, and they all reply that there's no need to worry. Rionette comments that Rick is calmer than she imagined, and he explains that he was just reminiscing about some things. When he was a child lost in his tales of heroes, Rick read that upon defeating the supreme monster Kaiser Alcipiat, one would gain a treasure capable of fulfilling any wish called the Akashic Records. However, Yamato, the hero everyone believed could achieve this, failed and stated that only a child dreaming of becoming an adventurer could obtain this treasure and have their wishes granted. Reading this story to his parents, little Rick dreamed of being like Yamato, though his mother thought being an adventurer carried great dangers that could lead anyone to death. In her motherly concern, she wished her son would find another type of work. His father, on the other hand, thought this dream was a childish wish that should be set aside because everyone should seek stable and decent jobs. In school, still a child, Rick discovered he had a very rare ability, but the evaluators couldn't say exactly what this power was. The boy wondered if it was the type of power Yamato had, and the evaluator replied that it was something like that. Just this statement was enough to make the boy's eyes shine with enthusiasm, but the evaluator emphasized that this power wouldn't manifest through training, but with time. Therefore, the boy had to be patient. On his way home, Rick could already see himself on par with the great Yamato, and he hoped that when this ability manifested, he could tell his parents and convince them that he had the talent to fulfill his dream of becoming an adventurer. In the following days, after telling his closest school friends about this hidden power, everyone eagerly awaited when Rick would awaken his true potential. Showing the typical impatience of a child, his friends would ask day after day if this power had appeared, and with a hopeful smile, Rick would say they just had to wait. A year later, his friends were still questioning him about this matter, so Rick now, with less joy in his eyes, considered that perhaps the power wouldn't reveal itself until he became an adult. Despite the evaluator saying it was an innate power that would come without training, the boy started to push himself, trying somehow to express this much talked about ability. Years later, already in his adolescence, the situation remained the same. His friends advised that there are cases where a person, no matter how much talent they have within them, sometimes never manages to manifest it. They asked why Rick didn't become an adventurer in the meantime, since many people who choose this profession aren't necessarily strong, but still manage to make good money. However, for Rick, being an adventurer didn't mean making money. In any case, being his age, he needed to find jobs to help at home, so he got a job as a receptionist at a guild called Tiger Road, making his parents proud. The following days were an adaptation to the new job, where the young man worked hard to fit in and be a worthy employee of the uniform he wore, though he felt some jealousy towards the adventurers who passed through. In his free time, he continued practicing, trying to manifest the ability he was told he had. But as time passed, he grew older and more stuck in this job, while adventurers constantly passed by showing their achievements and telling their journey stories. Even his parents, who once had a youthful appearance, were now showing gray hairs. Throughout this time, the Tiger Road receptionist kept his Legend of Yamato book close, though his hope of living the dream died a little each day. One day, Rick paid a reward to an adventurer who exterminated a slime infestation with Tuzazans and Lukes, and was thanked with a "thank you, uncle." Beside him, Alice tried to adapt to the new job and relied on her colleague for most things. Speaking of which, he mentioned that monsters expelled from their lairs had been appearing in the city lately, indicating a new mission. Most of these monsters were low level, so it was likely a rank D mission. In the meantime, Zaid proudly appeared at the guild to show off his new achievement, a rank B medal, meaning he could now make a living solely as an adventurer. Impressed, Rick congratulated his friend, though his voice carried a hint of sorrow. On the way home, the man admitted his frustration at seeing Zaid evolving more and more, while he himself sat in the same chair for 14 years doing the same job as always. At least he had a stable income, which was his parents' wish, but it didn't satisfy his need to do something more. In the midst of this reflection, Rick heard a girl's screams, so he ran to see what was happening. Along the way, a gigantic troll emerged from behind a house, a mid-level monster that didn't usually appear in that place. Suddenly, an elf passed by the monster, so Rick stepped in front to protect her. Seeing that the boy was full of fear, she told him to get out of the way and sliced the troll into pieces effortlessly. She then thanked the human for trying to save her, but made it clear he didn't need to worry because she was an adventurer. As the elf spoke, the moon appeared through the clouds and shone intensely, illuminating the imposing figure of Rionette Elfelt. Walking alongside the elf, the two introduced themselves, and Rick thanked her for the help, also asking if her rank was B, as he had seen her unusual strength. When Rionette said no, the man was startled to imagine he was in the presence of a rank A adventurer, but she wasn't part of that category either. In fact, showing her medal, Rionette proved to be rank S. At this moment, Rick almost went crazy because adventurers of this level were removed from the guild's records for being too strong, strong, and they could only be supervised by the main office. Having met someone of such a legendary degree, Rick asked if he could ask a strange question, but requested the elf not to laugh. In her defense, she argued she hadn't laughed since she was 8. So Rick proudly declares that his dream is to become an adventurer and defeat Kaiser Alcipiade, and that he has an innate ability that has never manifested. He wants to know if he can reach rank S, even though he's starting the profession at 30 years old. Rionette points out that the boy has courage, which is essential for this field, but she reminds him that mana development happens when one is young, which isn't his case. Therefore, she dismisses any possibility of Rick Gladiator succeeding in this profession. Pretending to be okay, Rick feels confused and thanks the elf for freeing him from this youthful dream, but at least he met such a wonderful person whom he would love to go out with any day to eat something. Even though he said it impulsively, Rionette accepts the invitation and arranges to go out with the human the next day. Back at work, the guy was pure motivation with his mood through the roof. Zaid comes asking for his first rank B job, and Rick hands it over as if the adventurer were the winner of the neighborhood raffle. After all, the guy is going out with a beautiful girl, which means his life isn't total trash according to his own words. However, his plans fall apart when people start shouting about the appearance of monsters. Worried, Rick runs to the meeting place with Rionette, but realizes his concern is unfounded because the area around the elf has turned into a cemetery of creatures. As more enemies approached, Rionette Elfelt used her cleaving blade ability and made all the monsters into pieces. After exterminating the opponents, the elf is overwhelmed by a vision of a hell where she was attacked by the shadows of an evil dragon. This leaves her out of action for now, so when another monster appears, Zaid shows up to prevent the guild receptionist's death. Besides him, other adventurers who usually take jobs on Tiger Road join the adventurer after responding to an emergency guild mission. Together, the warriors eliminate the threat, making Rick feel a pang of envy seeing what an adventurer can do. Still, Rionette, having somewhat recovered, warns that a dragon is nearby and that this team won't be enough. She knows this because when she feels a dragon's magic, she loses control of her own magic. Soon, the winged beast appears in the sky, so Rick understands the cause of the monster's flight. When the dragon lands and looks directly into one of the adventurer's eyes, the man panics and attacks with a burning shock, which, although it doesn't cause any damage, provokes the creature's fury that, with a single flap of its wings, throws all the humans to the ground. Zaid knows everyone needs to flee as they have no chance against such an enemy. However, despite the group's attempts to get away, the dragon raises a barrier around and traps everyone close to him. Zaid tries to break the shield with his axe, but the magical protection is too strong. Faced with this, the man is sure he's going to die today. However, to everyone's surprise, Rick Gladiator steps in front of the others. Nervously, he explains that if they're all going to die anyway, he'd rather go down fighting to die as an adventurer since he couldn't live as one. Though he had given up on the dream, the truth is Rick's blood still boils inside, and this boiling was more than just the hope of fulfilling his desire. With that in mind, Rick throws a stone at the dragon to vent this feeling, while Zaid rallies his colleagues not to leave the receptionist alone in this. Soon, the fake Chun-Li takes the front line, while the mage fires his cutting hurricane. Finally, Zaid takes advantage of the distraction to hit his axe on the monster's snout, but besides having no effect, the dragon now prepares to use its breath. Anticipating this, Zaid covers the entire team with iron body. However, although he saved everyone from becoming toast, the group members suffer the impact damage and lose much of their reaction capability. Even Rionette, a rank, knows she can't fight this opponent. Suddenly, re-emerging from beneath the dragon's breath debris, Rick stands in front of everyone once again and approaches the monster until he gets stomped. While the group laments the man's supposed death, he receives the information that he has acquired a new ability. With that, he lifts the dragon's paw by sheer force and exudes such an absurd amount of mana that even Rionette is frightened. With this energetic aura around him, he manages to protect his body from the dragon's breath. To counterattack, Rick uses the awakening of raw courage and launches a ray that opens a gaping hole in the monster's body. After killing the enemy, he faints. A week later, he wakes up from a coma with tremendous pain, so Rionette explains that he practically died when his magical circuits were destroyed. The elf patiently waited for Rick to wake up to invite him to join the Orichalcum because their goal is the same as the humans, to defeat Kaiser Alcipiade. Since it was a legend few believed to be real, Rick widens his eyes at the certainty that it was always true. Besides that, the elf points out that Rick showed great great talent and growth potential against the dragon, which could make him a great ally and above all an excellent adventurer. This was the first time Rick had heard this from someone else, so he can't contain his emotion. Back in the present moment, Gladiator hears his number being called on the loudspeaker. Officially promoted, he walks alongside Rionette and credits his achievement to his masters and himself, who never gave up on becoming an adventurer. Sometime later, the examiner Lynx Lorot sets out to meet the orichalcum fist after receiving a map of their location from Gladiator. A few days ago, Lynx was recovering from the cowardly beating he took from Raster Diamuit to put him out of commission. The examiner would love to have a drink with Rick as soon as he's discharged, as they had planned before the exam. Besides, Lynx is very interested in meeting this group Rick hangs out with, so he asks for the meeting to be at their residence. Rick warns him first and foremost that the examiner should come with as much equipment as possible because the place is eerie. Following the adventurer's map, Lynx arrives at Arcust District number 13. There stood Castle Weeghale, which according to Lynx looked like the Demon Lord's castle. As he approaches, he feels intimidated by the massive entrance gate. Taking a while to notice, there's a much smaller door granting access to the interior. Upon ringing the doorbell to call the residents, the large gate opens and Rick welcomes the visitor. Inside the daunting wall, the place was wonderful and gave a unique sense of peace. No wonder, as no monster dares approach the domain of the orichalcum fist. Hearing this from Rick, Lynx questions why he had been asked to wear so much armor to enter if there are no threats around. The adventurer explains it's to keep his friend from ending up in a coffin. Soon they enter the house and are greeted by Rionette. Lynx feels honored by the presence of the elf who helped him so much during his rank promotion exam. Behind Rionette, a little girl waves at Rick, leaving Lynx puzzled about having a child in this peculiar environment. Nevertheless, he would love for his daughter to grow up as healthy and happy as this girl seems. That said, the child casts a 6th level spell on the visitor, simply saying kaboom, and Rick has to save the man's life at the last moment. Obviously, the adventurer scolds a Lycerette, something he's done 1,000 times before for the same reason, casting spells inside the castle. The vampire complains that Rick doesn't play with her anymore, as if it were his fault. Maintaining her composure, Rionette threatens to deduct from a Lycerette's food allowance to pay for house repairs, prompting the girl to throw herself at the elf's feet begging for mercy. Rick sighs and asks the visitor for a moment to give the child, affectionately nicknamed Alice by the residents, some attention. Rick knows the little rascal will cause trouble again if left alone. Meanwhile, Rionette makes Lynx feel at home, and the first thing he does is observe the view from one of the windows, certain it would take days to explore the entire area. Moreover, he can see Mizet's workshop within his field of vision. Curious, he heads down to the dwarf elf and introduces himself, using his surname Lorot, asking about the type of craftsmanship the fellow is engaged in. Mizet explains it's an Ultra Flame Cannon number 6 and lets the visitor use the equipment against the scarecrow in the yard. According to the dwarf elf, all you need to do is focus your magic into the weapon and pull the trigger. Doing so, Lynx falls backward from the missile launcher's recoil and creates a crater where the projectile hit. Frightened by the weapon's power, he states that mass production of this armament would forever change the concept of war worldwide. Now returning inside the mansion, he walks more cautiously after nearly dying due to a crazy piece of equipment from a dwarf elf. Peeking into one of the rooms, he sees an orc through the half-open door and is shocked. Without taking his eyes off the book he's reading, Brufston, a shork, invites the visitor to enter if he wishes. Embarrassed, Lynx apologizes for the inconvenience and approaches the orc, impressed by the number of books there. According to the monster, these are his quarters and private library because he feels more at peace when surrounded by books. Despite having read almost all of them lately, the wise beast has been focusing a lot on Rick's training, which takes away some of his reading time. Knowing the orc was responsible for Gladiator's training, Lynx Lorot humbly asks this master to also work on his skills. Brufston stands up and praises the human's determined look because of its resemblance to his students. Later, Rick searches for the guest everywhere until Mizet informs him that the guy entered the forest with Brufston a while ago. At that moment, the man panics. Being thrown off a cliff tied to two immensely heavy steel balls, Lynx says goodbye to his two daughters Latina and Lilia. However, his fall is cushioned as he lands on some furry creature. Confused, he looks down to see Rionette lifting a giant boar that would serve as an ingredient for dinner. After being saved by the elf, the Philheim examiner thanks her for the help, while she immediately guesses that the weights on the human's feet were put there by Brufston. According to Lynx, his master ordered him to run down a cliff. Unfazed, Rionette comments that the orc is the one who kills Rick the most in training, and Lynx pretends he didn't hear that. Behind him, Brufston appears to continue the training and drags the man into the forest. After returning from the exercises, Lorot is happy to still be alive, just like Rick, who didn't have the chance to tell the man that training with the wise beast is a big problem for the unsuspecting. He also tells the guest that certain things the three Orichalcum members say should be completely ignored, like when Brufston claims he'll go easy on training, when Alice promises she won't do something again, and when Mizet guarantees he'll take something seriously. Speaking of the devil, the three were planted in front of the human, complaining about his exaggeration. However, Rick stands firm and maintains his stance, trying to keep his guest alive. Mizet asserts that Rick's mistake was precisely inviting this guy for a tour of the mansion, leaving Lynx even more terrified. Later, Rionette serves tea to the two humans and informs them that dinner will be ready shortly. Noticing a vibe between Rick and the elf, Lynx asks his friend what's going on between them once she leaves. Rick thinks there's nothing special happening, especially since he's just a dull 30-year-old guy. However, Lynx points out that the age difference shouldn't matter much. For example, his wife is 20 years younger than him. Either way, he knows that nothing can be forced when it comes to love. At some point, if it's meant to be, their feelings will align and everything else will fall into place in the blink of an eye. A bit later, during dinner, Lorot expresses gratitude for the meal, and Rick insists that his guest eat plenty, something Alice has already done but still finds insufficient. Besides her, the other two Orichalcum members also want to eat or drink more, so Rionette gets up to serve everyone. Lynx tells Rick that this is the perfect time to offer to help the elf and strengthen their bond, so Rick rushes out to avoid missing the opportunity. Meanwhile, Lynx becomes curious about the gladiator's innate ability, and Brufston explains that Rick can't activate the ability on his own, depending on certain factors for it to happen. If the man controls the awakening of brute force, he will certainly be stronger than even the members of the Orichalcum Fist. After Rick returns, the orc takes the opportunity to ask their guest, who works at the Central, if he has heard of the 6 gems of the Yamato legend, because their goal is to defeat Kaiser Alcipiat. These 6 gems are magical stones that open the portal to the Spiral of Origin where Kaiser sleeps. However, these stones are only activated every 200 years, and at this part of the cycle they are already releasing an enormous amount of magic. That said, the Orichalcum members want to know any additional information about this. Lynx doesn't know but promises to check the confidential department to see if he finds anything. After this, Rick whispers to his friend that he didn't find any right moment to help his love interest because the woman is simply perfect in everything and didn't need help with anything. Hours later, at the Adventurers Guild, a woman complains that she's cleaning when she should be continuing her young adventurer career. Soon she sees the Orichalcum Fist trying to take on a mission, but they need one more member in the group to have the required minimum number. So the guild master recommends they take Ray Lucas, a young girl who wants to explore the world as an adventurer. She doesn't seem very excited to walk alongside, according to her, a talking orca kid and a tacky old man. However, anything is better than sweeping the floor, so she accepts the challenge and joins the group. On the way, Rick explains that they are looking for a magical stone that is extremely valuable and has the power to attract monsters. Confident in herself, Ray states that she can handle any monster attracted by the stone because she might be rank F now, but soon she'll be at the top. By the way, she asks the man's rank and he says he is rank E. With this answer, Ray concludes that Rick is an old man who started late, so he must be ridiculously weak. Further ahead, Alice and Brufston find the magical stone behind the hills. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Mizet uses a gadget to blow wind on Rionette's skirt to lift lift it, so the elf quickly circles around and asks what's going on. He explains that it's a device that creates wind without using magic called the Stormy Maken. Rionette replies that it's quite interesting before destroying the device into pieces with her sword. On the road approaching the magical stones, the group encounters a wyvern and Ray panics. Without losing his composure, Brufston slowly approaches the dragon and punches it far away. Ray Lucas complains that the wyvern's death will attract several others to the region, so the orc gets tired of her whining and tells Rick to endure her talk. Later, the man is tasked with being the girl's personal listener until they see dozens of dragons being slaughtered ahead, where Brufston and Alice were killing each one of those winged beasts. However, a red wyvern and even stronger dragon race had circled around and landed in front of the two humans. As usual, Ray gives up on life and sits down, so Rick asks her to run. Not wanting to act like a coward, Ray changes her mind and decides to face the wyvern alongside her companions like Yamato would. Being a huge fan of the legendary adventurer, Rick accepts the proposal and asks the girl to provide support. With this, she prepares a first nature composite spell, but Rick jumps ahead and smashes the beast's head with one hand. The next day, upon returning to the guild, the girl is acting strange because of everything she witnessed yesterday, and the guild master understands why. The Orichalcum Fist is known for bringing trouble wherever they go, considering they are the most powerful Rankus group on the continent. For this reason, the master believes that Ray Lucas should be content with activities that align with her limitations. However, Ray is motivated to reach the level of those adventurers and do amazing things like they do. Speaking of which, the Orichalcum displays one of the 6 gems, the Crimson Flower, on their table, after finding it at the bottom of the wyvern's nest. By using the magic resonance of this stone, they will be able to find the other gems. With this intent, Mizet uses his earth mapping ability, opening a map that points to Heractopia, a country known for its Colosseum, where combat arts make the fame of this nation. 400 years ago, this place was a small country mainly composed of desert. The 4th king, Alexander Heractopia, saw a settlement called Nucleopercy and built the Colosseum there. He held combat competitions, and King Alexander himself fought unarmed, using only his body, becoming an undefeated champion of 10,000 fights. As his fame spread across the continent, fighters from all corners challenged the king to break his invincibility, while Heractopia thrived as a kingdom of immense prestige and vigor in the face of these displays of strength. Nucleopercy, where the arena was located, became the capital of this reign. Alongside the Orichalcum Fist, Rick Gladiator stands before the enormous statue of the man known as Alexander, the King of Fists. Brufston would have loved to fight at least once with this mythical man, though Rick thinks such a duel might have brought about the end of the entire kingdom. Rionette observes that this type of combat as entertainment still thrives today as a central part of this place's tradition, which Rick understands since the occupation of a fighter in Heractopia is extremely common. They even have a special name for those who battle in these events. They are called pugilists. With that said, the group sets off in search of the jewel they came for. Despite being a city accustomed to brutes walking on every corner, one of the inhabitants is startled when a gigantic orc approaches him on the street. Rick just wanted some information, but the man runs away in fear. Figuring he won't make any progress there, Rick suggests they look for information about the 6 jewels at the town hall. However, the scream of a defenseless girl catches the group's attention, and they see a beast woman being harassed by a man. Brufston approaches to ask a question, but the man takes offense at the orc's presence, warning that he is a pugilist and therefore unafraid of trouble. Brufston doesn't seem intimidated and even comments that the bald guy doesn't look very strong, enraging the man further, who then challenges the orc to a fight in a nearby alley. In a matter of seconds, Brufston beats the man, who now agrees to answer their questions. He introduces himself as Gold, while the cat girl is named Militia. Getting straight to the point, the wise beast shows the Crimson Flower to the locals and asks if they have seen anything similar around. Both feel they have seen something like it somewhere nearby, although they don't know exactly where. Behind the group, a crowd gathers to witness the opening show of the King of Fists tournament. Gold gets excited and reveals that this is the announcement parade for the city's Series tournament where the winner becomes the champion of the pugilists, and the Catgirl can't wait for these 2 months leading up to the event to pass quickly. This festival is so important that around 5,000 people come to Heractopia every year to watch. Cheered by the crowd, they see a pugilist named Kerwin Orwolf who has won the King of Fists tournament 5 times, 3 of them consecutively. Admiring the fighter being carried by an elephant through the crowd, Gold dreams of reaching that level one day. Speaking of a gleaming spherical jewel, Militia notices that Kerwin's champion belt bears a relic identical to the one sought by the foreigners. Brufston recognizes it as the Sovereign's gold, one of the 6 jewels. After the parade, the famous pugilist enters the academy where he trains, and a man approaches Kerwin to thank him for the show. The fighter doesn't mind because he knows the importance of exciting people on the eve of the tournament. However, the man with the eye patch doesn't believe that Kerwin is doing very well, which the pugilist denies. At this point, the 3 members of the Orichalcum Fist enter the academy in search of the great champion. Even the feared fighter of Heractopia feels a chill when faced with the enormous orc. Rick was trying to be discreet as he would inevitably have to broach a delicate subject. But that's not Brufston's style, who knows it's also not the pugilist's style to beat around the bush. So the orc gets straight to the point and reveals that the jewel on Kerwin's belt belonged to a member of Brufston's group a long time ago. If the champion hands over the relic, the orc guarantees to return a jewel of equivalent value. The eye patch man is offended by the visitor's stance and calls someone to expel the group, but the pugilist asks his boss to calm down, saying he can smell a liar, which is not the case with these 3 strangers. However, he refuses to hand over the jewel because this belt is special to the people of Heractopia and is part of the pride of this country. In other words, the only way to access the belt is by winning the King of Fists tournament. Brufston understands the circumstances and apologizes for the inconvenience, while Rick questions if they're just going to leave it at that following the leader of the Orichalcum Fist out of the academy. The eye patch man thinks they should teach these presumptuous foreigners a lesson, but Kerwin is sure the 2 would be dead if things came to a head against those 3. After all, the pugilist noticed the intimidating presence of the maid and is sure she possesses surprising abilities. As for the man, despite appearing normal, he seems to have trained his body to an extraordinary degree and has an aura that's hard to comprehend. Lastly, Kerwin knows that the orc carries absolute power within him. Outside, Brufston reveals the plan to become a pugilist to win the event and earn the belt. To enter the tournament, one must pass the preliminaries held in the east and west of the kingdom and progress through the rounds until winning the block, where everyone is also qualified. After that, the winners move on to the tournament's round of 16. Brufston leaves Rick with the Western League while he heads to the east, and to avoid getting lost in this unfamiliar place, the orc has arranged for a personal guide, a man named Gold. Then Rionette informs Rick that he needs to pass a test to earn the right to be a pugilist. She takes him to a simulated battle where his opponent will be chosen randomly from the new competitors. Rick asks if his opponent is strong, and the organizer tells him it's a promising newcomer who won all the preliminary matches in the tournament. However, even if Rick loses, he can still qualify if he demonstrates a certain level of skill. Suddenly, Rick's rival introduces herself as Flash, and he immediately recognizes the voice. It was Angelica Diamuit, the spoiled noble he had defeated, causing all that trouble with the Diamuit family. However, it's Angelica who panics upon realizing her opponent is Rick Gladiator. In the audience, 2 old men watch the simulated battle alongside a few other men, as Angelica's beauty tends to attract male attention wherever she goes. Although she quickly gained fame for her meteoric rise through the preliminaries, one of the old men warns against underestimating the other newcomer, noting that upsets happen in the tournament from time to time. In the ring, Rick asks if her older brother is also in town, but she tells him she came alone, which eases his mind. On the other hand, Angelica is tense facing the man who defeated her without breaking a sweat. Even though she doesn't need to win to advance, she doesn't want to lose this fight. Soon her strength would be tested again as the organizer starts the test. Once again, Angelica doesn't perceive Rick as threatening, but she remembers how she underestimated him last time and vows to keep her guard up at all times. She tries to use her instant step ability, but ends up stumbling and failing, much to her surprise. Embarrassed, she stands up and tries again, only to discover she didn't trip after all. In reality, Rick was tripping her, somehow imperceptible to the eye. He asks if she enjoyed the skill he learned recently. According to him, this is the first of the 8 secrets of taking it easy. The leg sweep. It's a technique designed to demoralize the opponent by not letting them stay on their feet. Essentially, Rick was kicking her legs out from under her so quickly that even she, a second-class knight, couldn't see it. Trying to maintain her dignity, she attempts to keep her distance, but it's futile. As she backs away, she's swept off her feet again, landing awkwardly on the battlefield. As he continued to sweep her every time she stood up, Rick seemed to feel guilty about how easy the fight was and praised the difficulty of timing the sweeps given Flash's incredible speed. He encourages her to stay in the fight, promising to go all out now, but Angelica raises her hands and surrenders immediately. Thus, Gladiator earns his permission to compete after sweeping a noblewoman 5 times. However, she doesn't take kindly to her new humiliation by someone she considers an old man. Rick corrects her again, explaining he's only in his early 30s. Angelica, now crying, asks how many times she has to be humiliated by him before he's satisfied. Rick hurriedly explains she's misinterpreting the situation, desperate to change the subject. He invites Flash to grab something to eat. By coincidence, they end up at an inn managed by Militia and her parents. After serving some snacks at the pugilist's table, the Catgirl asks where Brufston is, looking sad when she hears the orc is participating in the Eastern preliminaries. When the waitress leaves, Angelica asks Rick why he became a pugilist, and he reveals his goal is to win the King of Fists tournament. The girl finds his ambition offensive but is too humble to protest. Nonetheless, she informs him it's impossible for him to compete this year, explaining that reaching the round of 16 is a long journey with insufficient time left. For instance, only those who won 40 matches in the semester gain access to the league, and the maximum a fighter can achieve is 10 matches per month. With only a week left before the tournament begins, she deems it impossible for Gladiator to make it. However, despite her lecture, Rionette announces she has scheduled Rick's 40 matches within a 4-day period, leaving Flash speechless. Later, Rick heads to his debut fight in the preliminaries and learns his opponent will be Grit Albert. The worried organizer explains that this competitor is known for breaking tournament rules by using a weapon, although no body check has ever confirmed this. Soon, Rick faces the scoundrel in the battlefield, but the man appears unarmed. In his mind, Albert sees Gladiator as an old man who gave his all to become a pugilist at this age, and he intends to crush him to make it worthwhile. To achieve this, Albert uses an impact stone in his shoe, increasing his strike force by up to 30 times. As the fight begins, Albert throws his jacket over Rick's face to obscure his vision and punches him with all his might in the chest. After the insane impact, he believes he has shattered his rival, but it turns out Albert's hand is the one completely broken. With this, the impact stone falls from his hand, revealing his trick. Rick mocks his opponent, suggesting he should strengthen his body before delivering such a powerful blow with that item, despite Albert recalling he shattered mountains with his fist. Nevertheless, it's time for Rick's counterattack. He prepares the second of the 8 secrets of taking it easy. With a punch that doesn't land on the opponent, the wind formed around Gladiator's fist shakes Albert's brain until he's unconscious. With this incredible victory, the old man watching the preliminaries realizes Kerwin Orwolf finally has a worthy opponent. As night falls in a shady establishment in Heractopia, a monster named Jeeth sleeps soundly among beautiful girls until someone knocks on his door, announcing it's time to work. The following day, Angelica Diamuit took advantage of not being around Rick and dominated her rivals in the preliminary eliminations of the tournament. With 40 consecutive victories, the Lampijo secured her spot and was already thinking about winning the Block League matches just as Rick was getting excited to give his best. Angelica raised an eyebrow, questioning whether the guy really intended to fight 40 times in 4 days, since each venue only hosts 1 fight per day, meaning he would have to travel hundreds of miles to dozens of areas where the fights take place to meet that quota. But before Lampijo could even finish her thought, Rionette lost patience and called Rick to start the marathon, as they had a fight at Green Hill Arena scheduled for 10 am. Angelica freaked out, shouting that the arena was 30 miles away and that not even a souped-up carriage would get them there in time. Offended, Gladiator responded that he was in too much of a hurry to catch a carriage, which is why he planned to run there instead. In no time, he sped off at the speed of distinctive sound showing Diamut that the true Lampijo in the room had just left. While she struggled to accept that the guy defied all the laws of physics, Annette asked if Angelica was interested in watching Rick's fight. Angelica would love to see it, but had no idea how she'd get there in time, so the elf offered to take her in a way the human girl would never expect by jumping between the city's rooftops at a surreal speed, carrying her in her arms. Upon reaching Green Hill Arena, Rick was surprised to find Diamut collapsed in the backstage area. Despite being there, the girl hadn't managed to see the fight due to sheer panic. In any case, Rick felt somewhat relieved not to have an audience, especially since he'd made a serious mistake with the third of his 8 secrets for taking it easy. He realized at that moment that this move needed some adjustments. Behind him, Rionette reminded him it was time for the next fight, and he quickly headed off to his new challenge. Angelica begged to stay at Green Hill, but the elf ignored her pleas and carried the girl in her arms. At Kolak Arena, the human member of the Orichalcum Fist tried to calibrate his abilities to avoid turning his opponents into mush while still securing his victories. Upon reaching Shutgad Arena, Rick circled his opponent and finished him off with a small tornado created by his movement. By the time he reached Latrina Arena, yet another victim had fallen before the 30-year-old uncle. After the Colosseum's mad dash, Angelica could hardly believe that the guy had actually managed to achieve 40 victories in 4 days to pass the preliminaries. Sitting with the girl in a beautiful setting reminiscent of Venice, Rionette informed her that it was time for the block leagues, and Diamut thanked the heavens that she wasn't in the same block as that guy. After all, she did plan to win the tournament, but it seemed pretty difficult with Rick participating. Besides that, the elf reminded her that Brufston was on his way to the next round in the Eastern League, the S-rank orc who trained Gladiator. Upon hearing this news, it seemed like Angelica's hopes of winning the championship faded away completely. Rionette then mentioned that Rick had set off for the Tronier region, prompting the human to curse herself for not being surprised that the guy was simply walking the 600-mile round trip. Changing the subject, she commented that the elf might be uncomfortable with people seeing her so often alongside Rick, which could lead them to think the two were involved, but the maid didn't mind at all as she harbored great affection for the man. Embarrassed by the response, Angelica pretended it was no big deal. Out of nowhere, the establishment's manager appeared in a panic, desperate because he didn't have enough part-time workers. He begged the two ladies for help in a rather unconventional way, his forehead speaking volumes. Meanwhile, the Orichalcum Fist's Bugs Bunny reached his destination and was approached by a strange figure who knew his name. It was the president of the Western League Management Committee, and his name was Snape Resurrect. Snape had heard about Gladiator's historic run through the eliminations, and so he greeted the competitor. At that moment, an assistant informed the president that Angelica Diamut wasn't present, prompting Snape to assume that nothing could be done about it. Rick was curious about the man's acquaintance with Angelica, so Snape explained that they were quite close, as despite being a mere merchant, his relationship with the House of Diamut had always been very good. Since Snape's handshake was quite firm, Rick deduced that the man had once been a boxer, to which he responded that he had competed 20 years ago but had only won a small competition. The sense of accomplishment and the roar of the crowd had been very gratifying, but he was forced to retire at the age of 23, making that victory both his first and last. Rick was intrigued by the story and wanted to know the reason for the retirement, but Snape had to leave. However, before getting into his carriage, he mentioned that his company had entered a competitor into this competition and asked Rick to tell Angelica not to overdo it in the tournament. After that, Gladiator entered Militia's Inn, where she expressed concern about the man having spoken with the owner of the Dragonaut Company. After all, Snape Resurrect might seem like a gentleman, but rumors indicated he had deep connections to the criminal underworld. Besides, he was the main sponsor of this year's competition. Rick mentioned that the businessman had entered a competitor in the tournament, so the Beast Girl explained that this competitor was there to fill the sponsor's slot, a spot reserved for the company that financed most of the event. Nearby, two guys were chatting about the high level of this year's bunny girls, especially the newcomer, the Dark Elf Girl. Speaking of which, Angelica gives her all alongside Rionette to play the role of the event's bunny girl. Enthusiastic Diamut lifts everyone's spirits by taking bets on who the 7 competitors will be in the King of Fists tournament. A colleague remarks that Angelica was born for this job, which frustrates her since she's doing it against her will. Rionette chimes in saying she wishes the human had turned down the invitation, but Angelica couldn't bring herself to say no to a man with a bleeding forehead. Suddenly, a drunk man grabs a bunny girl's arm and chases her and her friend away, then heads over to Angelica to pester her. To make matters worse, he insults the girl, saying she doesn't even have a decent figure, so lightning decks the guy, leaving him on the ground. Rick arrives at that moment and asks what she's doing in that outfit, but then Rionette shows up dressed as a bunny girl too, catching the man's eye. Indignant, Angelica questions why his reaction is so different, all while smashing the drunk. As night falls, Kerwin Orwolf discusses with his master the crushing victory of Brufston in the Eastern League preliminaries, where the Orc won all 40 fights in just 2 days, each by knockout with a single blow. Despite this, Kerwin also recalls that Gladiator had a similar performance, so he's certain this year's championship will be great fun for him. Years ago, Orwolf's master followed a man through dirty, ruined streets of some city until they reached the gate of a structure. Inside, they saw the Beastman, who would become the celebrated champion of the King of Fists tournament, stacking defeated men all around the place. The master asks if they're in the presence of the voracious wolf, which Kerwin confirms, also wanting to know if the old man is from some gang looking to settle a score. But the master intends to recruit the fighter, inviting him to Heractopia, where he'll find wealth and glory. Faced with such an irresistible offer, Kerwin made an expression his master hadn't seen in a long time, one that was finally repeated when the Beastman discovered he had 2 worthy rivals in the competition. The next day, Rick and Rionette try to console Angelica after her stint as a bunny girl, but nothing they say seems to change Diamuet's furious demeanor. Gladiator then mentions he spoke with Snape Resurrect yesterday, but Angelica pretends not to know who that is. Later, the group heads to the venue where the next phase begins, where only one participant from each block qualifies for the final tournament. In the first fight of block, a Helen Thompson faces off against Angelica Diamuet. Angelica starts the match with her signature instant step, but her strong opponent seems to have sharp reflexes and blocks the attack. From the crowd, Rick comments that Diamuet seems tense, and Rionette agrees. Even so, with great effort, the young Lightning manages to defeat Thompson and advances to the next stage. When it's Rick's turn, he uses the third step of the 8 secrets to take it easy. As the hours pass, Gladiator and Angelica keep advancing, maintaining the same intensity until they reach the following rounds. Now only 4 fights remain, and neither can afford to lose if they want to make it to the eliminations. Diamuet doesn't slow down and surrounds Taylor Brids, her next opponent, with her well-known speed, combining her water wall with Thunderbolt Arrow to win her matches, but this adversary escapes the tactic unscathed. Surprisingly, the big guy matches Lightning's speed and hits her with a powerful punch, ending the fight. After the defeat, Angelica is treated by a nurse. Waiting for the girl outside the room, Rick mentions that her opponent's defensive strength was immense, but even so, she insisted on a strategy that visibly wore her down. Angelica loses her patience and storms off through the city until Rick convinces her to talk calmly. She then confesses that Snape Resurrect is her fiancé because he was the one who helped her when her parents died in an accident about a year ago. The children took over the management of the Diamuet lands, but the young one's inexperience led the house into serious financial trouble. That's when the family's stingy grandfather stepped in and made a deal with Snape. Eager to forge ties with nobility, Snape offered a truckload of money in exchange for marrying Angelica. With a slow mind, Rick finally realizes that the girl is engaged to the lizard man and goes crazy over it, while she adds that she investigated the guy while trying to annul her engagement to him and discovered he would become the main sponsor of the event. She was about to finish her thought, but a commotion from a bar catches their attention. Inside, Taylor Brids tries to help a girl being attacked by a lizard man, but he's taken down with just one blow. After that, the lizard turns his fury on the girl, demanding something in return for spilling his beer. Angelica steps in against the lizard, even though she fears his strength. But just as the creature is about to punch the human, Rick shields his companion. At that moment, Snape appears and asks Jeeth, his competitor, to hold back until the tournament, which the pugilist does by fleeing the bar. Rick asks who that was, and Snape reveals it was Jeeth Resurrect, his younger brother, a brute who flies off the handle at anything. Since no one can stand the guy, he's become that cocky. That said, he shows he's happy Angelica is safe, as his wife's well-being is his most precious treasure. As the businessman leaves, Rick questions the connection between the engagement and him being the tournament's main sponsor. Angelica explains that the money exchanged for the engagement was so much that after checking the assets of the Argonaut Company, she discovered they have almost nothing something, and this tournament is Snape's chance to reclaim his fortune. In other words, the event is already rigged, so the lizard is using the sponsor's spot to manipulate the outcome, which is why Angelica's getting involved. She wants to win the tournament and ruin her fiancé's company. The problem is to do that she needs to defeat Jeeth, which seems impossible. Faced with the challenge, Rick offers to train Angelica. The next day, the duo wastes no time getting to work, even though the task proves to be much more difficult than the girl initially imagined. Angelica, with weights strapped all over her body, each weighing 60 pounds, is advised never to deactivate her body strengthening ability if she doesn't want to die. She demands a better explanation for this madness, but Gladiator ignores her and takes off running a rope tied around both of their waists. He explains that by pulling her along, he's forcing her to run faster and with more strength. In the midst of it all, he begins correcting her first flawed movements, teaching her that while she has acceleration, her stride isn't stable enough. With her hair all disheveled, she pleads with Rick to stop running, and he jokes that it's the first time Angelica has called him by his name. With no energy to comment on it, the Flash begs him to stop, but he insists it's crucial to push past the limits. We think we have, reassuring her not to worry because only 6 hours remain until the end of today's training. Hours later, she collapses face first into the ground, exhausted. Gladiator remarks that this is just how tough training for a second-class knight is, while Angelica thanks God she still has her legs. Rick recalls nearly losing consciousness when he underwent this training, with Rionette mentioning he died 3 times just on the first day. Hearing this, Angelica proudly declares she survived her first day without dying, but Rick laughs, reminding her that it's only lunchtime. On the 5th day of training, she was enjoying her lunch on a warm sunny afternoon, convinced she wouldn't be able to keep up this pace until the end. At least she was in a secluded spot savoring her meal where no one could bother her, not even Rick. But just as she thinks this, her teacher appears at the window, having searched the entire kingdom for her. Frustrated, Angelica complains it's been less than 15 minutes since she tried to hide. Rick takes the opportunity to have some tea, while Angelica asks when he's going to stop drinking and starts scolding her for running away. But Rick surprises her, explaining that he understands her desire to flee. In fact, he himself ran away dozens of times during his 2 years of grueling training, dying thousands of times in the process. In one of these memories, Brufston realizes his pupil has died and borrows some mana from a Lycerette to bring the human back to life. Faced with a confused Rick after dying yet again, the orc explains that the vampire mage has granted him the power to revive Rick up to 2,000 more times, so it's time to keep going at the same pace. With this memory in mind, Rick tells Angelica he's gotten used to dying. She's surprised he endured it for 2 years, and the pure truth is that he tried to give up many times, but Brufston always said the right thing, urging him to weigh his current suffering against the regret of giving up. With these words, Gladiator could see the scene deep within his heart. Angelica deduces that he chose to endure the current suffering, which is true, while Rick concludes that even if he had quit, his master assured him he would watch him leave with a smile. For some reason, those words made everything easier to bear. Hearing this, Angelica confesses that she hates the customs of nobility, the pristine outfits, the manners, the heavy makeup, and the ridiculous dances. Despite learning all kinds of things, she always loathed every part of those etiquette rules. That's why she decided to contribute to the House of Diamuit as a fighter. Her dream is to become the first special class knight, so she believes her scales are also tipping towards current suffering. With her motivation renewed, the famous Flash is reminded by her teacher that her fighting style is a modified version of the knight's sword technique, making her more powerful with a sword in hand. Since the tournament rules require fighting without weapons, Rick suggests she learn a technique to turn her own hand into a blade. For that, he's brought in a special instructor, Rionette. After the intense night training, the tournament was in full swing, leading to the final match between the C block leaders, each with 7 wins and 1 loss. Angelica Diamuit faces Silver Helgand, with only the winner advancing to the next round. In the arena facing her opponent, Angelica trembles with fury like a caged Beast. The duo of elders who always observe the duels comment on the strange situation of Diamut believing she's likely at a disadvantage against Silver. However, as soon as the announcer signals the start of the fight, Diamut delivers such a powerful punch to her opponent that he flies against the wall with indescribable force, ending the fight to the shock of everyone present. From the stands, Rionette notices that the training paid off, though Rick thinks the girl might have been a little unhinged by everything she went through. At the Militia Tavern after the victory, Angelica reflects that for some reason the stares of the townspeople hurt her, making her question if she did something wrong in the tournament. Rick responds that winning is what matters, while Rionette warns that the people might be afraid of her. Alice and Mizet arrive at the tavern, and the elf asks the dwarf elf what happened to the rumors that one of the 6 jewels is in the Empire. Mizet replies that it led to nothing as there isn't a shred of truth in them. Militia comes to serve the newcomers and has to dodge the instant flirtations of the dwarf elf until Brufston arrives, guided by his loyal Squire Gold. The cat girl blushes at the orc's arrival, which infuriates Mizet. With the table set for a true feast, the wise beast announces that all that's left now is to win the tournament and receive one of the 6 gems. Alice would love to participate in the event, but Rick shuts down the mage's enthusiasm, fearing she might devastate the entire arena. The orc asks who the human at the table is, so Angelica explains that she was trained by Rick and Rionette, though many times she thought she was being tortured by the two rather than taught. Even so, each member of the Orichalcum Fist assures her that the human's efforts will be rewarded. Thus, the official start of the King of Fists tournament finally arrives, where the pairs are announced after a random draw. In the first match, we have Herman Mueller against Jeeth Resurrect, the competitor entered by the event's sponsor, the Dragonaut Company. In the second match, Angelica Diamut faces Doug Heap. In the third showdown, Rick Gladiator goes up against Selena Kine, and Rick is relieved not to have to fight against his master. Speaking of whom, the fifth match will be between Donnie Fisher and Brufston Ashork. In the audience, Gold asks Militia to stop giving his master those love-struck looks. The fourth and final match pits Eddie Grace against the 3-time champion Kerwin Orwolf, and the Beastman's master is confident that no matter who he faces, Orwolf will walk away with the belt once again. With the pairs for the first round established, Angelica tells Rick about the organization's scheme to implement their cheating plan. The Dragonaut Company manipulated the bracket to ensure that Jeeth wouldn't face Kerwin or Brufston until the final to impress the audience with their competitors' strength from the beginning. When it reaches the final stages with the odds at their highest, Snape plans to make a very clever bet, because if the lizard deliberately loses at this point, the boss will rake in a fortune. That's why they gave Jeeth the easiest path, including facing Angelica, if he makes it past this first round, and her plan is to destroy the sponsor's plans by defeating their competitor in the second match. Rick asks what Diamut would do if she doesn't face the lizard until the final, but she hasn't even considered that. After the bracket is divided, Kerwin and his master meet Rick and Brufston, and the members of the Orichalcum Fist confidently declare that they will take the belt home and consequently the gem they came for. Unfazed, Orwolf's master recalls when his pupil was younger. Back then, his academy had only managed to get one competitor to the 4th place in the tournament, so he put his new fighter up against this pugilist named Garen. On that occasion, Kerwin took a beating, but the taste of defeat drove him to train until he reached his physical peak when the Beast Man made his name in Heractopia by winning 3 tournaments. 6 years have passed since then, and now the pugilist faces the greatest challenge of his life. Soon the first round begins, where Jeeth Resurrect faces Herman Mueller. The human lands several hits on the monster, who feels nothing due to his above-average resistance. After missing a strike, Jeeth even hears a taunt from his opponent, but as soon as Herman attacks again, the giant lizard lands an arm on the guy's face, taking him out in one shot. Rick finds this very strange because even though Jeeth is strong, his movements are amateurish. Regardless, Angelica reminds him that the fight's purpose of impressing the betters has had its effect. Next, she enters the arena and finishes off Silver Helgand, while Rick and Brufston also advance without breaking a sweat. Now it's time for the final match of the first round, with Eddie Grace against the current champion. The Orichalcum Fist watches the fight closely to understand the extent of Kerwin's strength, which is demonstrated right from the first blow. Rick notes that Orwolf anticipated his opponent's dance move, and Brufston adds that the excellent sense of smell of a dogman provides this ability known as future scent. Despite the praises for the pugilist, the current champion takes a hard hit in the fight, which Rionette claims was intentional. After taking the hit, Kerwin gets up and knocks out his rival, and the audience relaxes after sweating bullets seeing their favorite fighter on the ropes. To his surprise, Rick hears one of the champion's colleagues comment that he's too inconsistent. A day later, the second round begins with the audience split between betting on Kerwin Orwolf and Jeeth Resurrect. Snape approaches Rick and formally introduces himself to his companions, so Alice comments that the lizard is overdoing it with this whole act, which embarrasses the businessman. Mizet explains that adults have to pretend to be adults all the time, and the vampire discovers that life for those who aren't children can be quite harsh. Rick asks why Snape isn't in the VIP seat, and he explains that he wants to see the fight between his fiancée and his youngest up close. Speaking of them, the two meet before the match, and Jeeth says his brother asked him not to mess up his future wife's face. Angelica is eager to show the results of her training, while the lizard laughs about only spending his father's money on nonsense and still being stronger than his opponent. Since he brought it up, Angelica claims it's impossible for Jeeth to have such a physique without training, and he dodges, responding that sometimes he's the guy people call a prodigy. Either way, he promises not to crush his opponent so she can still carry Snape's children later. Offended by this insult, Angelica vows to crush him. The clash between the two begins, and Angelica starts with a flying kick to Jeeth's torso, but he doesn't feel the impact. At least unlike Herman, the Diamut Knight has the speed necessary to avoid taking hits, as she suspected her physical attacks don't work against the youngest Resurrect, so she cancels her enhancement magic, leaving the entire audience baffled. Afterwards, she uses Magic Flow Reverse Reflection and advances with instant step, finishing with a new technique she learned, Thread Cut, where her hand simulates a sword and slices open Jeeth's belly. Rick boosts his pupils' morale as Rionette explains that this is one of the secret techniques for body control. When she demonstrated it on a stone during training, the elf made the human think she could never achieve something like that. But at the same time, her desire to learn was so strong that she decided to set aside her insecurities and dedicate herself to the instructions, determined to master the correct movement. Not only that, but she also invented her own method based on the teaching combining magic flow with reverse reflection. Despite this, Mizet reminds her that this technique releases stored energy in the body in a short burst that is more powerful than usual. However, Rick emphasizes that the surreal training she underwent prepared her body to withstand this impact. Finally, Rionette concludes that no one can use the thread cut the way Angelica does because she combines her instant step with the movement. Speaking of which, the noble Diamut repeats the strategy that worked before and charges at her opponent again with this ability, creating another slash across his abdomen, which only fuels his rage. In response, the reptile punches the ground, raising a cloud of dust that obstructs his rival's vision. He then tries to catch her by surprise, but Angelica is quicker and dodges before being hit. After that, she reverts to the same tactic and slices Jeeth's torso once more. At this point, Snape makes a point of noting how interesting this technique is, but he doesn't seem too concerned about his fighter's physical condition in the arena. Jeeth, having grown tired of holding back, reacts by raising dust once again. With that, he lands a strong blow on his brother's wife, pinning her against the wall. He even apologizes to Snape for going too far, but admits he couldn't resist such an entertaining prey and decided to handle things his way. In any case, Snape knows that the young man can be somewhat temperamental at times. However, Angelica returns after the heavy impact and assures him that the blow she suffered was nothing significant. To prove she's still in the fight, she resumes her strategy of using the thread cut, but this time Jeeth strikes her with his tail effortlessly. Angelica Diamut insists on the technique, so Jeeth loses patience and reveals that he has learned to replicate his rival's instant step after watching her do it so many times. Seeing her opponent running beside her at the same speed, Angelica can hardly believe what's happening, but there's no time to reflect on the situation because Jeeth has fully switched to offense and lands another blow, hurling her against the wall with great force. Not only that, but the monster taunts her, remarking that there's nothing better than stomping a mediocre piece of trash into complete humiliation. Rick begins to worry about his student, while Snape comments that his brother's strength is truly extraordinary. He's known this since he met Jeeth back when he was still a famous boxer. At that time, the youngest had been adopted at the age of 8 and was already training with his older brother in one-on-one fight sessions. In their first bout, Jeeth hit Snape so hard that the poor man could barely stand, which led to his retirement. After all, Jeeth is a perfect prodigy born with all the talents necessary for combat. Speaking of which, the monster resumes taunting the human in the arena, saying that all her years of training ended up being worthless, and that she must hate her parents for not passing any talent on to her. Taking advantage of the fact that he mentioned the girl's parents, he recalls that both are dead and concludes by saying that trash parents produce trash children. Snape comments to Rick that Angelica is probably suspecting that the fights are rigged, but he sees no need for such petty tricks. In reality, what the businessman did was bet a large sum on his brother because he's an unknown fighter that no one else bet on. In other words, that's the trick where Snape will make a big profit by being practically the only one who wagered on Jeeth. Meanwhile, the Red Dragonkin defeats the woman in the arena, and the crowd starts to frown at the scenes unfolding in the match. Rick imagines that Diamuit is at her limit, but she has no intention of giving up. On the contrary, even though she can't even stand, she assures them that she won't lose. Now Jeeth's motivation becomes to crush his opponent's fighting spirit and savor it. So he lifts the girl by her hair, and intends to show everyone that not even the most dedicated boxers can defeat a prodigy. At the same time, Angelica battles within herself to maintain her hope as her mental balance is still tilted towards the necessary sacrifice. With this in mind, she tries to strike the enemy, but she's so weak that she can only lift her fist without even touching him. In response, Jeeth throws her against the wall and for the first time reveals his claws with the intention of killing his adversary. Rick stands up and shouts that the match is over, but the lizard charges at the noblewoman with all his fury. Just as he's about to strike Angelica with his fangs, an object is thrown at his arm, diverting his aim. As the announcer declares the fight over, Jeeth looks at the shoe thrown at his arm and wonders who had the audacity to do that. When he looks at the crowd, Rick Gladiator is standing there missing one shoe with rage emanating from his body. Without a second thought, Rick heads toward the arena access to retrieve his shoe, but Jeeth anticipates the encounter, commenting that the big guy has been up to something. Since Rick doesn't respond, the lizard tries to kick him, but the man dodges effortlessly while tying his shoe back on. Then Gladiator tells the monster to wait because what's coming for him is well deserved. Jeeth punches the wall with excitement, eager for this duel. As the protagonist descends into the arena, he effortlessly wins his fight with just one strike. The first thing he does after his victory is seek out the doctor responsible for Angelica Diamuit's treatment. Upon asking about her condition, Rick learns that she sustained significant damage in her battle against Jeeth, meaning her recovery will take some time. However, she's not in any life-threatening danger. Hearing this, Rick reflects on how frustrating it must be to undergo such intense training in pursuit of a dream only to be eliminated in this manner. Just thinking about it makes Gladiator tremble with rage. Meanwhile, Brufston also handles his business, advancing to the next round without any trouble. Later, Kerwin Orwolf faces Mylene, a boxer known for her lightning-fast kicks. During a moment of distraction, the Beast Man receives another blow and nearly loses his balance, but just as Mylene gains confidence in the fight, he slams her head into the sand, ending the battle. Even with this easy victory, his master knows he's not in top form. Regardless, only 4 fighters remain to compete for the championship belt tomorrow. The next day, Rick trains early and meets Angelica in a part of the arena. She apologizes for wasting his time training someone with no talent, and now that she's lost, she feels like she rebelled against her noble role for no reason. She even starts to consider that marrying Snape might not be so bad, as he could treat her well and she wouldn't have to work. However, Rick feels he owes her an apology for not recognizing the true strength of Jeeth Resurrect. Speaking of which, he asks her to pay close attention to the upcoming fight between the two. Thus, the Orichalcum Fist member faces Jeeth in the first semi-final. The first thing the monster does is express mock concern for his last opponent given what he did to her. Or rather, he says he should apologize for not killing Angelica because now she's forced to live her miserable life instead of being spared it. Rick doesn't hide his anger at the provocation and punches the arrogant opponent in the the face who thought nothing would happen. Surprised and furious, Jeeth tries to retaliate but is hit again, spitting blood. Angelica is amazed that Rick's punches could cause so much damage to Jeeth's resilient body, so Mizet explains that Rick is using the penetrating attack, a technique that targets the inside of the body, not the external part. Jeeth doesn't give up and uses a Dragonkin ability, Dragon Force, which greatly boosts his strength and speed. Seeing Rick's opponent strut around the ring after conjuring this technique, Brufston notes that it probably consumes a lot of magical energy, and Snape adds that his brother never trained his magical capacity. Gladiator responds with another penetrating attack, but this time Jeeth is coated with iron body and takes no damage. After using Dragon Force, the Dragonkin seems to gain a significant advantage in the duel, so he begins landing a series of blows on the human. Snape comments to Brufston that the result of this fight was already quite obvious, but the orc disagrees because for Rick the way we see the fight doesn't make a difference. Meanwhile, Jeeth becomes breathless from hitting his opponent so much, but Rick hasn't spilled a drop of blood as he had the Fluid Strikes ability, activated a body control technique that disperses incoming attacks across the body. Essentially, the man barely took any damage. Jeeth accuses his rival of holding back on purpose, and Rick admits he restricted his physical abilities to match Angelica's level and fight with that in mind. Brufston adds that winning this match isn't the only thing that matters to Rick. He also wants to show Angelica her potential. Rick tries to warn Jeeth to ease up on all this anger, as there will come a point when the Dragonkin will suffer from pushing himself too hard. But Jeeth has no intention of losing this fight, so he reactivates his iron body and layers on the strong fist along with instant step. Turning himself into a veritable war machine, he launches a decisive attack on his enemy, but the strength of the Orichalcum Fist member is so impressive that he shatters all of the Dragonkin's abilities with just one more penetrating attack. Moreover, Resurrect was exhausted, leaving him vulnerable. Rick points out that his opponent never pushed himself to the point of exhaustion, so he doesn't know how to handle fatigue. In his view, the strength a person gains after reaching exhaustion is their true power. Tired of the lecture, Jeeth resumes his assault, but Rick is now fully in control of the situation. On top of that, he throws in Jeeth's face that he relies entirely on his innate talent, but is merely a level 1 prodigy, while true prodigies use their born strength to develop to massive levels through hard work. Rick, for example, knows some prodigies who reach level 1000 opponents who could defeat Jeeth with a single strike. Furious at this rant, Jeeth resorts to the Dragonkin's most powerful innate strengthening magic dragon recordion. With it, Rick's attacks no longer have any effect, and he realizes that Angelica really wouldn't have been able to beat Jeeth at this level. Even so, he emphasizes that this doesn't mean she shouldn't train intensely, as sometimes a young girl will have to face a burly man in life and won't have the chance to run away. With that said, Rick moves at an incalculable speed through the arena using instant step as a reference, making Angelica realize that this would be the result of her special ability if she continues to train intensely. According to him, ordinary hard work might not overcome the difference in innate abilities. It takes a certain madness to maintain extraordinary efforts. Angelica understands this more and more, reaffirming which side of the scale she's leaning toward. Jeeth then stirs up a sandstorm to limit his opponent's vision on the battlefield, so Rick uses Thread Cut, though he doubts it will work since he doesn't know how to execute the technique properly. But when the dust settles, Jeeth Resurrect has been gravely wounded, thus ending the fight. The crowd goes wild with the incredible performance of the man who came to be known as the Old Man in the public eye, while Angelica makes sure to thank the sensei for the taste of sweet revenge he was able to provide her, not to mention the fact that the guy took the boxer from Snape out of the game. That said, the host calls for applause for the winner, who enthusiastically feels the love from the audience. As for Snape, Rionette notices that he seems strangely calm, and the businessman admits that this harsh blow was less painful than he had anticipated. After all, it was good for him to see his brother learn an important lesson from this defeat, as it was the boxer who had ended his career believing himself to be unbeatable due to his monstrous talent. Alice comments that he's talking about difficult things again, and Mizet chimes in, teaching once more that these are the kinds of things adults have to deal with all the time. Although he doesn't feel as bad as he expected from this loss, Snape admits it's a shame shame he won't have Angelica Diamut as his wife. On the other hand, the girl couldn't be more pleased with the downfall of the Dragonkin and makes a point of rubbing it in his face that his petty dream of joining the nobility went down the drain along with his marriage proposal. With impeccable formality and a refined vocabulary, Snape admits that having a lovely maiden like Diamut was something he longed for, which is a shame, and these brief words were enough to cause an odd reaction in Lampejo. Meanwhile, getting ready to enter the ring, Kerwin Orwolf couldn't be feeling better. His boss makes it clear that the Beast Man is an excellent boxer, and the fighter jokes that the old man must have eaten something bad to be so sentimental. But that's not it at all. The human just wants his protege to give it his all, which Kerwin fully intends to do now that the host is calling him to the fight. With that, the second match of the semifinals is announced, where the orc who knocked out all his opponents with a single punch, Brufston Ashork, will face the three-time champion and fan favorite Kerwin Orwolf. Angelica is startled by the amount of applause the Beast Man receives, but Rick had expected nothing less from the greatest champion of all. Although confident, Orwolf isn't foolish and knows he's up against a one-of-a-kind opponent. Studying the giant orc, the ravenous wolf doesn't see a humanoid figure, but rather an unbreachable wall standing in front of him. With his unreal speed, Kerwin advances and tests the orc's defense, landing a series of punches that don't even tickle Brufston. On the other hand, had he been hit by the punch the wise beast threw in return, the Beast Man would surely be dead. Then the most unexpected happens. Jeeth resurrect, as his name suggests, rises from the ashes, his eyes glowing with an intense red and his body appearing more overwhelming than ever before. Moreover, the Dragonkin seems consumed by madness as he leaps into the crowd, stirring up dust with a series of strikes. Snape knows this is the devastating effect of dragon recorgen in his brother's blood, and he braces for the worst. Kerwin, wanting to continue his fight, calls out the dragon for disrupting the match. Without hesitation, Jeeth charges at the Beast Man, but is unexpectedly stopped and takes a punch to the stomach that's sure to leave him hurt. Orwolf shuts down the Dragonkin with just one hit, much to the shock of Rick, Angelica, and Rionette, who now imagine this boxer must be an S rank for sure. Regardless, the event host announces that the semifinal has been postponed to tomorrow due to the chaos caused in the audience, as the injured need to be prioritized. Kerwin laments that he's in peak form right now, but he takes the decision in stride. Brufston sees uncertainty in his opponent's fists, and those words strike the reigning champion hard. Later, the Orichalcum Fist reconvenes at the team's usual hangout, the Militia Tavern. Except for Rick, who went for a jog all the way to Claristia territory, a little 700-mile round trip. Speaking of the devil, the runner has just arrived at the kingdom's borders, where a mountain reminds him of Rionette's curves. There, he finds Kerwin Orwolf, who had been peacefully training in his corner until approached by the human. Rick asks if the guy isn't worried about overworking his body before tomorrow's match, but it seems the Beast Man is more interested in using Rick as a sparring partner until the semifinals come around. Without further ado, he calls the old man to a fight, and Rick responds with a lightning-fast punch that the opponent manages to block. Since Kerwin blocked such a quick strike, Rick wants to know why he took that hit during the tournament. He guesses that the dog man must have had a blocked nose and couldn't smell the opponent's movements, but the truth is much harsher. Kerwin explains that he grew up in the slums and fighting was his favorite pastime, but there came a point when he beat everyone mercilessly, and the thrill of fighting lost its charm. After arriving in Heractopia, things were good at first, but after becoming an undefeated champion for the second time, defeating all his opponents with a single punch in under a minute, he realized that even official tournaments could be a drag since they didn't present a real challenge to the ravenous wolf of the slums. The only thing that kept his attention was the satisfaction of his boss, who smiled from ear to ear with the boxer's performance. One day, he overheard the boss talking to a gym employee who thought that the fact the fights were ending so easily would eventually break their business, as no one was willing to pay to watch a match with a predictable outcome. Months later, on the eve of the final of the third tournament he participated in, Kerwin reflected on what he should do to avoid driving his master into bankruptcy. So he considered finding a middle ground to make the fights more exciting. The first punch that came his way was extremely slow to his perception, but even so he decided to take the hit and fake being defeated for the sake of the show. In the tournaments that followed, he continued using this strategy of adjusting his strength for others' entertainment, but the reality is that he no longer felt any desire to fight. After hearing the whole story, Rick can kind of see see the guy's point but warns him that things will be different tomorrow. Orwolf doesn't buy it, though Gladiator is far from trying to convince the man of anything, so he leaves without much more to say. The next day, a defensive spell is triggered to protect the audience, ensuring the crowd's safety. Facing Brufston once more, Kerwin charges forward at the starting signal, raising the stakes by attacking with the rolling fang, spinning his arm at high speed to amplify the power of his strike. Brufston blocks the attack with ease, though slightly less than before. Now the orc starts dodging punches instead of risking his guard being exposed, and counterattacks with his fists, forcing the Beastman to stay sharp lest he ends up flattened. After a brief lull in the action, Brufston had analyzed his opponent's fighting style and deduced that he's intentionally holding back something Orwolf admits to doing, though he feels he may need to abandon that approach against the orc. Either way, he acknowledges it's shameful for a champion to deceive the audience like that, but Brufston sees it differently. The boxer is prioritizing the spectators, which is what a true professional should do, even if it's unfortunate that the orc can't fight full throttle against Kerwin. To balance the match, Brufston decides to fight using only 2 fingers and without moving a single step. With that settled, Kerwin charges again with the rolling fang, but this time his opponent blocks the attack with just his index and middle fingers before landing a powerful blow on the boxer. Kerwin manages to dodge the second strike, which would have likely been much worse, just as he hears the crowd chanting his name. He feels a surge of excitement for boxing rushing through his veins again. After all, this wasn't just any rival, and it could be his chance to test everything he had been holding back to level the playing field in his previous fights. Suddenly, his boss yells out Orwolf's name, accusing him of faking the fight. The businessman's dream is to train the strongest boxer in history, so Orwolf shouldn't be holding back. Those words gave the fighter the push he needed to abandon his plan of saving the gym now with his boss's approval. The new goal is to show everything he's got. Kerwin delivers a devastating punch that forces Brufston to defend with his whole hand. According to the orc, he's just adjusting his strength for the block, nothing more. From there, Orwolf goes all out but ends up getting cornered, forced to use his iron body technique to avoid being crushed against the wall. This impressive technique left the audience with mixed feelings. As amazing as the fight was with the crowd witnessing something unprecedented, it also gave the impression that Kerwin Orwolf had been deceiving everyone by holding back in previous bouts. By this point, the Beastman didn't care what people thought, so he unleashed a 5th nature composite spell, the Flame Wave. While the dogfolk aren't known for their magical prowess, Orwolf had developed his abilities to an unprecedented level, putting him on par with Rick Gladiator's mentors, according to Gladiator himself. After seeing his opponent defend against the flames with a rock, Kerwin attacked with the instant step and strong fist, then summoned a 7th nature composite spell, the Forest Rope. But the boxer didn't stop there. In an attempt to subdue Brufston, he began preparing an 8th nature spell, leaving the entire audience slack-jawed as the arena trembled. In the end, Kerwin Orwolf cast the Angel's Tear in the sky, making Rick fear for everyone's safety, knowing this would force his master to get serious with the Beastman. In response, the wise beast threw a punch at that massive energy mass, tearing a hole in the ozone layer and turning the Angel's Tear into Crybaby, as all that remained of the giant spell was dust. With that, Brufston gave the approval quarter signal, a typical orc gesture to declare that things had just gotten serious and that the place where the fight was taking place would become a lawless land where anything goes. For the first time, Kerwin felt true terror running down his spine. After dodging a punch, he was blown back by the wind generated from the swing, nearly stumbling. Out of breath, all the voracious wolf could do was fall back, firing off a series of spells that didn't even make his opponent blink. Evidently, after using mana like water, Kerwin was utterly exhausted and defenseless. A punch to his gut left his internal organs and bones feeling like a mixed grill. It would have been easier to give up, but the man had been waiting for so long for a worthy rival that he decided to stand once more. Using the last of his energy, he went for an all-out brawl, but his stamina gave out in mere moments, leaving the voracious wolf from the slums drained before the wise beast. Even so, the crowd pushed Kerwin Orwolf to keep fighting, cheering him on even after realizing he had been deceiving them all along. This made it clear that the fighter hadn't lost the love of the people, and that gave him a second wind enough to force the match into overtime. time. With no magic or strength left, Kerwin dug deep into his spirit to throw one last punch that would decide the outcome of the battle once and for all, merging the instant step, strong fist, rolling fang, and flame sword. Afterward, Brufston silently applauded the beast man's effort, in his mind too lazy to use his hands. Having seen his strongest punch absorbed effortlessly, Orwolf smiled and admitted that today had been the most fun he'd ever had in his life. In honor of such a magnificent fight, the orc gave his opponent all the respect he deserved by landing a punch so hard that it knocked the beast man's lights out. Despite everything, Kerwin's master still considered his student the greatest boxer in history. Brufston Ashork is announced as the winner of the match. Rick praises his mentor's performance, while Angelica points out that defeating the champion in such a dominant way is amazing. However, Brufston replies that it wasn't a crushing victory because Orwolf's final strike was truly impressive. Gladiator then mentions that they already have the jewel in their possession, so there's no point in continuing the fight in the finals. But Brufston makes it clear that he can't wait to have a proper no-holds-barred showdown with his apprentice. In that moment, the human trembles with such fear that he ages 25 years in just 3 seconds of sheer terror, losing half his hair and developing sudden baldness. Meanwhile, Kerwin is reading a newspaper article that says the semifinal was thrilling, but Orwolf fought without passion on the sacred grounds of the King of Fists tournament, deceiving everyone who watched. Naturally, this has sparked a wave of criticism, and the feral wolf from the slums knows he's now seen as a sort of villain because of it. Looking out at the orphanage courtyard and watching the children play, his boss reassures him that everything will be fine. Incidentally, he wants to know what that crazy move was at the end of the fight. Kerwin explains that he was so focused on the fight, he just went with the flow. The master suggests naming the move something like Composed Nature Spiral Fist, but in reality, the fighter is deeply troubled by the fact that he deceived the audience and everyone involved, on top of being defeated, which supposedly takes away the excitement of rooting for him. The master replies that people still admire Kerwin in their own way, and that there's no shame in losing because next time the fighter will try twice as hard and get back to winning. Moved by this remark, Orwolf asks why the boss cares so much about him. The man responds that he sees the young fighter as a son. Kerwin was about to say he sees the man as a father too, but Brufston enters the room before he can. The orc apologizes for the interruption and offers to heal the wolf man, but the truth is Kerwin wants to feel this pain because it's been a long time since he felt anything like it. He then comments that the fight went exactly as Rick Gladiator predicted after facing the wise beast, and he can't wait for the final match. At the Militia Tavern, a young woman tries to drag Rick out of his room with Snape and Gold at her side, but the man is terrified of dying. Angelica tries to break down the door but fails. Snape walks up the stairs and tries to intervene, telling the man through the door that now that Kerwin has lost, everyone is excited to see a new champion, so it's important for Rick to compete in the final. Rick responds that his life is more important than a fight, so Snape switches tactics and, channeling a musical theater performer, starts singing about how thousands of people work in this tournament, hundreds of millions are being bet, and tens of thousands of spectators are eager to see a great fight. But if Rick wants to, he can go ahead and crush the dreams of the entire city and just sit there crying in his corner. After the dragonkin leaves, Angelica argues that the orc can revive his student whenever he wants, but Rick thinks she's only saying that because she's never died. According to him, dying is terrifying. Angelica reminds him that he endured 2 years of dying every single day, but now he's going to whine like a child. Rick yells that he never seriously fought that mythological beast, so she could never understand. With that, Angelica gives up trying to convince him and declares that she no longer respects him as a teacher. She storms off in anger, leaving Mizet to comment that Brufston already had Rick's training plan ready the day he arrived at the castle. A complete 2-year regimen. Rick finds that odd since the original idea was to train allies to help defeat Kaiser Alcipiade. The dwarf elf explains that was the goal, but the orc also wanted to train someone he could fight as an equal, because orcs have a fighting culture that helps them understand each other and the world around them. The boss is so strong that since he was a kid, he never had a fair fight with anyone, and that made him feel lonely. His biggest dream has become finding someone who can truly match him in a balanced contest, and that dream could come true tomorrow. With that said, Mizet understands if Rick wants to quit, but he asks the human to consider Brufston's perspective. As the weapons expert leaves, Alice asks Rick to go play with Uncle Orc, because the orc really wants to play with him. Hearing those words, Rick is thrown into a memory from 2.5 years ago when he was first welcomed by the Orichalcumphis and was in awe of the place. Upon meeting Brufston Ashork, Rick was simply terrified by the size and presence of the orc. Through Rick's muscle movements and mana flow just from a handshake, the wise beast discovered that the novice had no knowledge of martial arts and possessed the lowest possible level of magical energy. Therefore, the young man didn't yet have the skills to become an adventurer. Rick assumed this orc was like all the others who insist that he should give up on his dreams, so he asked outright if Brufston was the same. But the answer was quite the opposite. What the master wanted to know was if Rick understood he would have to work 100 times harder to reach a high level. While Rick sulked in the safety of his room, Angelica fumed over his pathetic behavior. On the other hand, Mizet understood how the man felt because training with Brufston was like hell on earth. Gladiator had been driven mad countless times, and it was a mystery how he survived such insanity. However, Mizet and Alice explained that the human fighter had an innate special ability with a complicated condition for activation. Since the strength and damage caused by this ability to his body were uncontrollable, Brufston had banned its use. Listening closely, Angelica hadn't known about that. In the late afternoon, Rionette stands outside Rick's room, and the man wants to know if she thinks he's pathetic. She assures him that she doesn't, but whatever Rick chooses, he will still just be himself, though she prefers the Rick who would fight for the sake of Brufston. Regardless, the next morning marks the day of the grand finale, with the stadium packed to capacity. Amidst the crowd, Rick's and Brufston's companions are present, with Snape dreading the possibility that Rick has truly decided not to fight, which would have a huge financial impact on the event's sponsor. However, just as he's about to enter the arena, there stands Gladiator, declaring that he's overcome his issues and will continue with the match. Angelica and Rionette, who had gone to check on the adventurer, notice that something seems off about him, but Rick assures them he'll give his senpai a thrashing even though his body language tells a different story. Meanwhile, an extra prize for the competition is announced: a year's supply of golden slime punching bags plus a pair of tickets to a hot spring trip. To lift his spirits, Rionette whispers something in Gladiator's ear, causing his eyes to tremble. Whatever she said, Rick Gladiator steps into the ring to face Brufston Ashork and promises his master that he will give it his all. Hearing this, Brufston urges his student to use everything he's learned against him in this battle. Watching the confrontation, Kerwin and his boss can barely contain their excitement, eager to see the action unfold because these two fighters are incredibly strong. At that moment, the announcer declares the fight has begun, and Rick launches an instant step without hesitation, charging at the orc with missile-like speed. The impact sends rocks flying everywhere, forcing the defensive magic to shield the crowd once again. As a result, a gash opens on the orc's arm, and he admits he's surprised. Terrified Snape asks what kind of magic that was, to which Alice explains that neither of them used magic. Angelica wonders if that was a physical clash with body enhancement, which Rionette confirms. According to her, after dozens of blows and attempts to block and dodge, Rick used the thread cut. In the ring, Gladiator attacks with a flurry of force and speed, but nothing that breaks through his opponent's guard. When Brufston counters with a punch, Rick has to dodge quickly to avoid death. Rick insists on pressing forward with an aerial kick, but the orc easily blocks it and nearly hits him in return. Dodging and attacking once again, Rick repeats the thread cut, tearing a gash into Ashork's belly. Angelica asks what Rionette said to Rick before the fight, and she reveals that she told him to take her to the hot springs if he won. Upon hearing this, both Rick and Angelica couldn't stop thinking about that hot spring trip, and the girl wonders if the date will last all night. Without hesitation, Rionette confirms it, and Angelica manages to calm down before sitting back down. Brufston remarks that it would be disrespectful to just stay on the defensive in this fight, especially since Rick willingly stepped into the ring. So the wise beast unleashes a blow that gathers an insane layer of wind, hurling it at his opponent like a tornado. Kerwin notes that such a strike is certainly more powerful than a fifth nature compound magic. From that moment on, Rick Gladiator realizes he's truly facing the wise beast and that he'll end up dead if he isn't ridiculously careful. Brufston attacks again with the same move, but this time he multiplies the tornado-like wind several times over, forcing his rival to evade with extreme difficulty. The last strike even catches Rick, though not fully, but the truth is it was just a distraction for the orc to close in through the smoke and charge at the human. In that maneuver, he nearly lands a punch, but Gladiator defends himself with the air cushion, a first nature compound magic. Kerwin is was impressed because Rick didn't even have to say the name of the spell to activate it, and he defended against a powerful strike with a basic spell. Brufston compliments his pupil's magical control and admits that he can no longer cast spells without incantation. The apprentice explains that he owes this skill to Alice and Mizet. The vampire remarked that the human worked incredibly hard to master this, and the dwarf elf agrees, especially recalling when Rick lost control and endured a barrage of magical attacks from a Lycerette. On that day, half of his body turned to dust. Gladiator resumes his attack with the fluid strike, but it's blocked by his opponent. Although he hasn't managed to inflict significant damage, Rick has also successfully avoided being hit thus far. Dodging another tornado punch, he leaps and becomes vulnerable, but when the orc repeats the move, Gladiator manages to use the air cushion with his foot, using the impact as a springboard to launch an air shot that hits Brufston with force, though it doesn't cause any visible wounds. At this point, Angelica realizes she's truly witnessing a battle between two S-rank fighters. Brufston acknowledges that Rick has made tremendous progress thanks to the perfect training plan he devised, but mostly because Gladiator had the mental and physical strength to endure it. Rick knows that his master never gives empty compliments, so he feels honored and shares what Mizet told him about Brufston's dream. The orc replies that it's an exaggeration to call it a dream, but Rick is certain because of the passion Brufston showed in training him. Therefore, Rick wishes to repay this debt of gratitude with a worthy fight. Hearing these words, Brufston feels lucky because Rick has truly become a member of the Orichalcum Fist after these intense 2 years. And since they're on the subject, the wise beast takes the opportunity to reveal something important about the founding of the organization.